Okay. So just continuing on after watching that video, which illustrates how many millions of people died during the conflict in World War II. In the few decades after that, we have a variety of things going on, particularly between Russia and America. We're going to look at a couple concepts that you should know. Will help you to understand what is happening here as well. First one is expansionism, so attempt to enlarge territorial and ideological influence beyond a country's borders and allies. Both America and Russia are expanding their influence on the world. Particularly, I suppose Russia is trying to, or the communists are trying to gather more and more communists as much as possible and bring more countries into that particular ideological system. The Americans are expanding by, preventing the expansion of the communist philosophical system, and by extension, then, having some sort of control in those areas. They practiced this until the end of the Cold War in, I believe that should say 1991, not 1999. And that's where you start to see some shifts as well. With expansionism comes this sphere of influence. Okay, so obviously you're going to have your own borders and territory, but you can extend your influence into several other areas of the world by proxy. So again, if you look at a map, and we'll look at some more conflicts later on. Anyone that borders Russia, although they may not be communists themselves or socialists, they're still impacted by the fact that Russia and this communist philosophy exists in this particular area, right? They exist within the sphere of influence. Containment was used by both parties in an attempt to prevent the other group's ability to expand. So obviously, the Americans got involved in a variety of conflicts to contain the expansion of the Soviet Union, and I would assume that the Soviets did something similar to contain the expansion of capitalism. Okay, and again, just a reminder, this particular chapter looks at when these ideologies come into conflict, right? We looked at rejections of liberalism in chapter 7. This one is looking at how these two ideologies exist in reality. So we're going to look in the next couple of slides at the Truman Doctrine and Marshall Plan, but that's American containment. Molotov Plan is what the USSR did, the Soviets did to contain and to maintain their own influence within their own states, the communist states. I'm going to move on, or are we still filling notes?
Yeah, still filling.
I'll save what I have to say for the next couple of slides. It is interesting to consider, why do these two ideologies, why do these two philosophical systems come into such conflict? Why they're, first of all, they're on opposite ends, but why are they always in conflict? Would it be possible to have a communist state and also capitalist states? Is that even possible? Clearly, people back then didn't think so, and part of it could be that within the economic aspect of liberalism, ideally you want more people to play that game. You want more people to be able to trade with. You want more opportunities, as many opportunities for people as you can provide. And then from a universal human rights standpoint, again, you want people to be free, to have access to resources, to have freedom of choice as well. And, is that always happening in a communist state? I'm not sure. Although it doesn't seem like it was. So we have the Truman Doctrine. So these nations pursue many different methods to get what they want. So the Truman Doctrine was one of the few methods implemented. So I'll read this quote out to you. Nations could adopt a way of life based upon the will of the majority, and governments that provided guarantees of individual liberty, or they could face a way of life based upon the will of a minority forcibly imposed upon the majority. This latter regime, he indicated, relied upon terror and oppression. So, they're really criticizing how the communist state came to be. Again, Karl Marx was very upfront about utilizing revolution and overthrowing people violently in order to create the socialist utopia that they wanted. Well, as I was mentioning to one of the grade 9s who's in my flex today, that let's say you are one of the few members of that group of people who brings forth the revolution and is trying to usher in the socialist utopia. At that point, are you then going to give up control and say, well, we're all part of the process? Or are you simply going to say, as you reasonably would or should, that, well, me and my friends played a significant role in creating these circumstances, so we should be the ones to make the decisions on how it plays out moving forward? And typically what has happened in history is after the violent revolution, the overthrowing of whoever is in charge, whoever is oppressing. Mao did this with his communist group, Lenin did this as well, and Stalin took over. I don't know exactly how Pol Pot came into power. He probably had a military coup. These people seem very unwilling to let go, so they do rule with terror and oppression. One of the quotes I love, and very funny source, Pitbull, the musician, who is from Cuba, which is a former former and current communist country. And one of the things he says is, you don't see people getting on a raft and swimming away from America, but you do see that happen from Cuba. And it's quite interesting, right? So even in China, my friend wrote a book about this, and I interviewed him on my YouTube channel, but his mother was one of the many people that were part of the freedom swimmers. These people literally swam from mainland China to wherever they could get to. His mother went to a place called Macau, which was under the colonization of the Portuguese at the time. Other people fled to Hong Kong, other people fled to Taiwan. His grandfather, or I guess his grandfather fled to Taiwan. And again, you don't see a lot of people getting on a ship or getting into a little life raft and leaving Canada or America. And there's a reason for that, and I would imagine part of it is that we experience a high degree of freedom. Sure, life isn't perfect, but you have opportunities to make it better. You're not told what you can and cannot do. Nor are we, well, to some extent, just ruled by the will of a minority group of people. So again, the people who brought in the communist revolution and utopia, the small group of people, but they took over with force, and now they're dictating what happens for everyone. Here, I'll read this as well. So I'm going to close the door because there's clearly a party going on out there. So this is by Harry S. Truman, March 1947. At the present moment in world history, nearly every nation must choose between alternative ways of life. So again, they're at an extreme point as well, just like the Germans were. The choice is too often not a free one. One way of life is based upon the will of the majority and is distinguished by free institutions, representative government, free elections, guarantees of individual liberty, freedom of speech and religion, and freedom from political oppression. Just to clarify, what they mean by free institutions, free elections, is that free elections meaning that you're allowed to vote for whoever you want. Has anyone here voted by any chance? There's only a couple of you are 18. I guess not.
Registered to vote here.
Excellent. So when you go to vote at the next election, what you won't see is armed gunmen and goons and thugs who make sure you vote for the right person. Nobody's allowed to see who you vote for. So you're free to make that decision. Okay. The second way of life is based upon the will of a minority, forcibly imposed upon the majority. It relies upon terror and oppression, a controlled press and radio, fixed elections, and the suppression of personal freedoms. In a lot of these communist states, this is true of China, this is true of Russia, the media is very much controlled by the government. people in charge, which is interesting because CBC is a crown corporation, meaning they're funded by the government, and there might be a conflict of interest there. I believe that it must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures. I believe that we must assist free peoples to work out their own destinies in their own way. I believe that our help should be primarily through economic stability and orderly political process. So this is kind of hypocritical in that, okay, if they're free to carry out their own destiny, and maybe part of that country's destiny is to have some sort of military coup, communist takeover, should the Americans then involve themselves in that country's destiny? I don't know.
Hey, sir, what time is it now?
Clearly not late enough. It is currently 2:50. You're stuck with me for another 30 minutes.
Washroom, please?
Assuming. So here's President Truman.
Kind of Tyson juice left.
And to clarify, so the reason why it's called a Cold War and not a hot war or regular war is because in a Cold War, the two people who are fighting don't fight directly. So Russia and America never got into a direct conflict. They didn't battle each other directly on a battlefield. They use a lot of proxy wars. So there's a proxy war like Afghanistan. The invasion of Afghanistan was one. Vietnam was another. All the situations, everything that happened in Cuba as well. A couple other countries, but that I'm unaware of. We'll just move on. Okay. Additionally, we have the Marshall Plan, which again, they're providing financial aid to countries, helping them to recover, providing them with some sort of industry opportunities. Both of these plans are based on the idea that it derived from the realization that prosperous countries are more likely to resist communism. Middle and upper classes typically don't support communism. Again, it's very appealing when you don't have anything to have someone say to you, we'll redistribute the wealth. You have been oppressed. There are people who have been putting their thumb down on you your whole life, and you have been wronged, and therefore we will come in, we will take the money from these people, we will redistribute it to everyone. Everyone should have equal and fair amounts of wealth. There should be no class, there should be no distinction or separation in society. It's very easy to, I guess it can be challenging to resist the appeal of that. Particularly, when someone says, hey, we will absolve you of your poor decision making. Let's say you put yourself into some financial hellhole. It's very difficult to resist that in general, but even more so when your life isn't going so well, let's say. But generally speaking, when things are going well, when things are prosperous and there's opportunities and you're not jealous of the people who have more than you and you're grateful for what you do have, you're very unlikely to vote for these types of philosophies. And when you really think about it, so in communism, everyone's going to live the utopia, and people are going to be able to spend their days as they please, and everyone will be able to eat cake and make art. The challenge with that is that, even if you wanted to paint all day, who's going to make the paint? Who's going to make the brushes and the stencils and everything you used in that process? Who's going to transport it to you? Should some people work for free so that you can, sit back and relax all day? Additionally, if you've ever been on vacation, there's only so long you can go without doing something productive until you just get bored. I believe it was Aldous Huxley who said that, if the utopia did come along, we would tear it down just to see something interesting, new, or different happen. People get bored, they do horrible things. They waste a lot of their time, they're not very productive, efficient, or effective. Typically they end up miserable. Anyways, a lot of those problems are hard to solve. One of the easier problems to solve is how do you make a country more economically prosperous? How do you help them build up their industries so that they may they may provide their citizens with a degree of comfort and quality of life. So over the lifespan of the Marshall Plan, 17 countries in Europe received both money and technical expertise from the United States. And that's important as well. It's not just that they gave them money, just threw money at their problems and said, go fix it. They also went in and helped them build these industries up. And so that those people can be prosperous on their own afterwards. And they're not fully dependent and relying upon the United States. Here's a little quote, I believe this is from your textbook. It reads, recipients had to agree to balance their budgets so you cannot spend more than you make, stop inflation and stabilize their exchange rates at realistic levels. Big major factor of inflation is governments just printing money that has no value, nothing backing it up. They were also encouraged to decontrol prices, so let prices fluctuate with the market. Again, this is a free market economy where the price of items goes up and down based on supply and demand. Eliminate trade restrictions, so stop, just more free trade, and resist nationalization of industry, privatize things. Don't just leave it up to the government. Let people compete to see who can provide the best service. So this is what the Marshall Plan is asking them to do. In short, the Marshall Plan imposed free market policies on Western Europe in return for aid. This is the reason why the Soviet Union rejected the Marshall Plan for itself and its allies in Eastern Europe. So it'd be good to consider, is this right? Is this a good thing to do? You're essentially saying someone, here's all this money, but you can get it if you do a bunch of things for me. So let's say it's in your life. Someone says, I'll pay you $1,000 a day, but you got to go to bed at 10 p.m. and wake up every day at 6 a.m. You got to exercise for an hour and a half. You got to study for an hour and a half. You got to go do this job for 4 hours, and you got to cook your own food, blah, blah, blah. Is it fair to then say, okay, you can have this money, it's free, but you have to do 7 things for me, and you have to do them every day. It's tricky, right? There's a lot of strings attached to this agreement. Now, obviously, just throwing money at people and saying solve your problems isn't going to solve problems, because that money's going to disappear real quick. Can or should we pay people to become liberals? And that's challenging, right? What is the... if you're trying to help someone, if you ever choose to do that, it's tricky. You got to keep in mind what is best for that person, not just best for yourself. What is best for that person now? What is best for that person in the long term? What's best for you as well, right? If you're dealing with person-to-person basis. And is liberalism the best thing? Pretty damn good, if you ask me. Giving people free choice, giving them opportunities, allowing them, again, just to be free. They're not living under someone's thumb. You're assuming that they are mature and wise enough to take care of themselves. Which ideally, you're all going to become adults soon enough here and continue maturing. Would you want to continue living under the thumb of your parents? Having them decide what you do, where you live, where you work. Is it in their best interest? It might be. Again, if you're a country, you want to provide the best opportunity. Well, regardless if you're a country, if you're a parent, a person, you want to be able to have access to the best opportunities, in my estimation. You don't want to be limited by not having enough opportunities. So it might be in their best interest to create prosperity, to make everyone a little bit wealthier, have more money, be able to keep a roof over their head, to be able to buy some food, have some clothes, maybe have some nice things as well, because there's nothing wrong with a bit of luxury, a little bit of excess, certainly better than not enough. Although, well, we won't get into that. The Soviet foreign minister labeled this process dollar imperialism, and it's pretty accurate, but better than gun imperialism. And particularly if the US is eventually going to back off and let those countries be on their own, well, it's not completely unreasonable. Okay, we'll finish up with this slide and then we can just have some free time. So, rejection of aid. The Soviet satellite states were now communist, rejected the Marshall Plan aid for a number of reasons. Recipients of aid were expected to submit a thorough economic assessment and participate in a unified European economy. Which is kind of hypocritical as well. It's like, hey, we want individualization, we want freedom, but you'll have to be part of a unified European economy. Abide to conditions that were incompatible with the Soviet ideology. So, it's tricky. It's like being next to a grizzly bear with something that the grizzly bear wants. Makes things complicated. It's like, hey, I'll give you some food, but there's a bear over there, and if I give you the food, the bear's going to smell the food, and it might attack you, it might not, right? So it makes things challenging. Questionable that the U.S. would follow through with aid to countries under the influence of a communist power. Very reasonable, right? If they examine their history and think like, okay, well, these people might not actually utilize the benefit. Anyways, there's a little quote there at the bottom. When Czechoslovakia continued to express interest in the Marshall Plan, they were advised by Stalin, quote, "I believe that the sooner you reject the invitation, the better," end quote. So again, the competitor is essentially, putting a gun on the table and saying, hey, I think it's in your best interest to say no to this plan. Not that you can't say yes, but it might be in your best interest as there's a weapon or a threat on the table. So it wasn't exactly a free choice, which just really emphasizes what we learned about how the Americans are trying to provide them and to create an environment of freedom. Okay, and we'll wrap up with that. Thank you very much.